Welcome to our home. We are so thrilled today to be studying in the Old Testament, Exodus chapters 7 through 13. These are some of the principles and topics that we're looking at. So first of all, it is, regardless of our religious faith, the Word of God is important to us. It is helpful for us to learn about a religion and individuals within that religion by talking to the actual people. And then what holy envy do we have that other people need to know, or it would be helpful for other people to know, and what other holy envy do other people in other religions have that would be helpful for us to know so that we can build on peace and community. Welcome to Grounded, where women and men of all ages, nationalities, and backgrounds gather together with me, Barbara Morgan Gardner, and my guests as we strive to gain a bedrock understanding of the life and teachings of Jesus Christ and become more like Him. Today we have the most amazing friend. This is Maytal Saltiel. Maytal is a wonderful chaplain who is Jewish. And we were just talking, I couldn't remember where we had met, and Maytal reminded us that we actually met here in Salt Lake City, Utah. What was the name of the gathering again?
It was the Parliament of the World's Religions.
Parliament of the World's Religions, that's right. And I got to know her. We were serving on a panel together, and I was so impressed with her, and I've been impressed with her over the years. We've had a chance to run into each other a few times after, and recently this fall, I ran into her again. She was offering a prayer at a forum on faith in New York City. And I was just elated to be able to run into her. And I just thought, we need to have Maytal on our podcast. And we need to hear it from her perspective and understand more of the Passover from one who is Jewish in faith. And I'm going to let you teach us more about that, Maytal. But before we do, Maytal is the 8th Yale University chaplain. She's the first university chaplain who is a Jew. And I just cannot stress how important that is. Also that she is a female. And there have been, one or two others before you? Just one. Just Sharon. Is that right?
Yep.
The influence of these incredible women like Maytal on these universities it's hard to express unless you're kind of in that position, which we can talk about a little bit more. That she is very much listened to by administration and guiding students and administrators and teachers. So thank you for being in this position. Her work primarily oversees religious and spiritual life on campus. She focused on fostering and deepening interreligious collaborations and conversations, pastoral care in times of grief and growth, and nourishing diverse religious and spiritual traditions on campus, which is part of that responsibility of a university chaplain, but especially your responsibility as, in my words, I would say the head chaplain there at Yale. In addition to your chaplain's office staff, you also work closely with Yale Religious Ministries, who help support the Yale community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then before Yale, you worked at Penn Hillel and Johns Hopkins Interfaith Center, and you graduated from Johns Hopkins University and Harvard Divinity School. Your study and your background is it's so telling. It's telling of a person who cares and a person who loves people and who loves God. So just thank you for this life of caring, really. I know that you're married, is that right? And you have a family. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Sure. Thank you, Barb, for having me on this podcast, and thank you for your curiosity and wanting to be in conversation around this. I really value that. It has been such a pleasure for these past 10 years, maybe more, knowing you. I do have a family. I'm married, and have 2 kids. I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, who are incredible and fantastic and love drawing and soccer and reading and, exploring the worlds. And I feel very lucky in that.
Thank you so much. And we'll get into that a little bit more as far as kind of your lived experiences as well as we talk about this. So we're getting into Exodus chapters 7 through 13. And I'm going to have you tell us what that is a little bit in your terminology and the terminology you would use. So with those topics, I really wanted to start with this first one with you, Maytal. I mean, we're talking Passover, which is one of the questions I really wanted to get in with you to talk to you about. But we may study this a little bit different than you do. And I just talked about how we're in our Old Testament and we're looking at the book of Exodus. And this is very much how a member of our faith would be referring to this as, but may not be how you would refer to it. And so I want you to kind of take it over from there and then maybe teach us a little bit about studying scripture and why the book is important to you.
Sure. Yeah. So we would not call it the Old Testament. We'd call it the Hebrew Bible if we were speaking in English. The book of Exodus is part of the Torah, what we call the Torah. And the Torah is part of what's called the Tanakh, the Torah and the prophets and the writings, the Torah, the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim. And so the book of Exodus is read, it started traditionally, we read the Torah, the entire Torah every year. And we started normally in the fall in like October around the holiday of Simchat Torah, or the celebration of the giving of the Torah. And so we get to Exodus normally around December, January time. And the chapters that we're talking about today go between two parshas, or two parts of the Torah that we read in different weeks. So a parsha we read every week, and we complete the Torah cycle in a year. And so those are 2 different weeks that we're reading on a Saturday morning, because that's when we read the Torah out loud in our communities, in a synagogue, a temple, a shul, which are all 3 different words that mean the same gathering place for Jewish communities.
When you say we, meaning we read the Torah, are you saying your community there in New York? Are you saying the whole world? What are you saying?
The Jewish community around the world will be reading the same parsha every week. Different synagogues might read the whole parsha or might just read a third of it. So there are in some Reform synagogues, and there are many different kinds of Judaisms, and they're held together by their calendar, by some of the rituals that do this. So in some Reform congregations, they'll do a triennial reading. So they'll read the first part of that parsha and the first part of the next parsha, and then the next year they'll read the second part, and then the third year they'll read the third part. And so they complete it in 3 years. But more traditional synagogues, and many Reform synagogues as well, will read an entire parsha in a week. So we complete the whole Torah reading, or the whole the 5 books of Torah, which is Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy within 1 year. So these section that we're talking about today really starts talking about the plagues. We're in Egypt. God has told Moses, go tell Pharaoh, let my people go. Moses says, I can't do that. I'm tongue-tied. I need some help. And so God says, go to Aaron, and Aaron will help as well. And so the section we're talking about today is about the plagues, the 10 plagues that happen in Egypt. It's about the sacrifice of the Passover, that God has the Israelites sacrifice a lamb in preparation of going out into the wilderness. And it's about, we finally get to the point where Pharaoh finally, after the 10 plague and the killing of the firstborn, says, go, I'm done with you, go. And at the very end, there's an allusion to fill in that says, bind the words that I have said to you on your hand and on your head. And I think that's the end of chapter 13. And so there are a lot of different parts within this section that we repeat every year. We repeat not only when we tell the story and read the parsha in Hebrew in our synagogues and our gathering places, and when we teach our children, probably for the vast majority of Jews in the world, if they're not going on Saturday mornings, because not all Jews do, they're going to remember this and tell this story in the Passover Seder. And the Passover Seder is probably the time throughout the Jewish year that all Jews will do something Jewish. And so for some people, the Passover Seder lasts from like 7 p.m. till 2 a.m. And for some people, they do it in half an hour. So there are lots of different varieties on how you tell this Passover story. But the idea is that from generation to generation, you pass on this story, what happened to us when we were slaves in Egypt, and how we got free. And the idea is that you remember, not only are you supposed to tell the story, but you're supposed to really remember in your body what that felt like and what it means to be free. And thank God that we're free, right? I could talk about the Passover Seder forever. So please stop me.
No,
at
keep
any
going,
point.
please. We want to hear this, please.
There is a song during the Seder called Dayenu, which means it would have sufficed. It would have been enough. And we say, if God had only taken us out of Egypt and that had been all, it would have been enough. If God had only given us the Torah, it would have been enough. If God had only given us Shabbat, it would have been enough. And the idea is like, thank God for all of those things individually. And also, we got all of them. Like, how amazing is that? And this idea that enoughness is really threaded through all of this, right? To be grateful for every little thing and to know that even this would have been enough. So there are lots of techniques in the Passover Seder that are used to teach this story to the children, that are used to like continue on to this day. Passover Seders have been going on for a very long time, and every year there's sort of new iterations. So a Haggadah is the book that you use. I brought mine that I use with my kids, that you go through the Seder, and there are different readings and different teachings and different rituals. And so to go back to the plagues, when we tell the story of the going out of Israel, of the Israelites from Egypt, we also recount the plagues. And every time, this is not a wine cup, but we have 4 glasses of wine or grape juice at the Passover Seder. And when we get to the time of the plagues, we take our pinky and we dip it in the wine. And for every plague, we take out a drop of wine from our glass. And the idea is that we are so grateful to be free. And we also know that there was suffering that came because of that. And so out of our glass of joyfulness and freedom, we do note each of those plagues. And we know that has caused suffering to other communities. And that's one of the ways that we really ritualize and like embody that moment of the plagues.
When you're talking about you're dipping your finger in the wine or the grape juice and remembering the plagues, is there any significance to the different plagues? Or is it that these plagues happened and you're recognizing that these plagues happened and they affected more people as well?
The one thing about Jews is we love to talk about things. We love to come up with stories and ideas and wrestle with ideas. And, the phrase 2 Jews, 3 opinions is real, right? Like there are many different stories and reasons that things are. And for the past 2,000 years, the rabbis have encoded some of this into the Talmud and to different responses. So I think there are reasons and people will have their own reasons. I think the one thing about the plagues as well is that when you read the text, it's that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, right? That Pharaoh didn't harden his own heart, but God had an active role in this. And this is something to wrestle with. Why did God harden Pharaoh's heart? Why didn't he just let Pharaoh say, go and be free? And part of that explanation is, one, the Egyptians had to go through 10 plagues to finally actually let the Israelites go, because if they would have let them go first, they probably would have made them come back, because that's a whole bunch of free labor and the ways that the system was set up. But part of it is also for the Israelites to realize what an awesome God is, what it means to truly understand what's about to happen, and what this exodus and what the next 40 years of wandering through the desert will be. There's this idea that you had to have gone through that process. In terms of what the specifics plagues mean, from the blood in the Nile to the frogs to the beasts to the darkness, I think that for me is like everything, right? Like the water that you drink, your body, the places that you find peace, the food that you eat, the ways that you see the world, like all of our senses are being impacted by these plagues. And all parts of a society and a world and a person's life are being impacted by these plagues. And then finally, the worst of the worst, the death of the firstborn, takes this to an emotional level that I can't comprehend, right? That and it's only after that the Israelites are truly told to go.
Every time there's this plague and you hear the Pharaoh and he says, he basically kind of repents and says, okay, I can see how bad this is. Your people can go. And then he takes it back again and he doesn't let the people go. And I want to say sometimes, Moses, stop believing him. I mean, he's full of himself. He's not being honest. He's serving his own people, his own purposes, and he doesn't really care about you as a people. And I wonder how it is that Moses continues to go back to him, and it seems like he believes him. Or maybe he's just testing him. I don't know. That's just one thought. I wanted to throw out something for our LDS audience that I think is interesting. Maytal, this is kind of something I'll just share with you. I don't know how aware you are of this or not, but we have this prophet of the Restoration. His name is Joseph Smith. And he had what is called he has a Bible translation. So we use the King James Version of the Bible, but Joseph Smith has a translation where Pharaoh hardened his heart. So it's just a little changing on the word, which I think is very significant, again, in both religions, that we have the same story, but just one word changes everything, right? And I think it's important that we study it and recognize that, even with each other, that we can see that we're talking about the same general story, but one semantic, one word that has changed really does change how we perceive even our own scripture, our own word.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And why it's important to be in community and ask humble questions of one another.
Yeah,
Right?
yes.
Like why we should share and not just assume what somebody else is thinking.
Right. You mentioned the book that you have, and I can't remember the name of it, that you said that you use to teach your daughters.
The Haggadah.
The Haggadah. Another aspect of what I know about you and many of my friends of the Jewish faith is the importance of teaching their children, and the importance of spending time and a good education and asking good questions. Teaching your children to think for themselves and teaching your children to be, and I would say, spiritually self-reliant and open-minded is important. And I just wonder, how do you do that?
I think that children play such a key role in Judaism, and the idea of generation to generation, we pass this down. It's dor v'dor. From one generation to the next, we have to continue to pass this down. And this shows up during a Passover Seder in many places, but two that pop to my head explicitly are there's a time in the Passover Seder where the youngest child in the family or around that table asks 4 questions. It's called the 4 questions, and you sing a song with it. And, often the older people help the younger person because maybe they're a little bit nervous about it. But that there's this explicit role for children to ask questions. That is not even that they just sing a song, but it's a song about questions. And then the idea is during the Seder, we're answering those 4 questions. And the refrain is Manishtana halayla hazeh michol halelo, which is, why is this night different from all other nights? On other nights we, eat bread, and on this night we eat matzah. That's the first question. And the idea is that we want to put those words into our children's mouths, because once they can start to ask the questions, even if they're their own questions or questions that were told to them to ask, like that, they then become part of the story. And they then become part of the ritual, and it becomes their ritual. There's another time in the Passover Seder where you talk about the 4 children. And the 4 children approach the Passover Seder. Traditionally, it's the 4 sons. In many more liberal communities, it becomes the 4 children. And it's how they're asking for the story. So there's the wise child, the wicked child, or otherwise sometimes translated as the rebellious child, the simple child, and the child who doesn't know what to ask. And for each of these children, we have a different answer of how we answer them, because we know that not all children are the same, and that we have to approach people where they are and what they're ready to engage in. And for me, the idea is that also each of us are all 4 of those children, right? At different times in our lives or different moments of our days. Sometimes we're the wise child and we want to pore over the scriptures and we want to read more and more what this person wrote and what that person wrote. Sometimes we're the rebellious child that says, this is your story. What does this have to do with me? If I was there, I wouldn't be doing any of this. Sometimes we're the simple child that just wants a really simple, quick answer of what's going on. And sometimes we're the one who doesn't know what to ask. We don't even have the words to ask the questions. And so the teachers need to be able to supply a starting point. If we don't even have the vocabulary to ask, then that's the obligation of the community and the teachers in order to start those conversations.
I noticed in our Exodus chapter 12, verse 26, you were talking about having these children ask the questions, and it's right there. It's in the scriptures itself. It shall come to pass when your children shall say unto you, what mean ye by this service? It's like taking these questions and saying, we want the children to be asking these questions, and you as parents be prepared to know that they need to be asking. That there's a community type feel that we want to set the stage that asking questions is a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Hello, my dear friends. Before we jump into our next topic, I'd like to invite you to just think about what you are learning, what you are feeling, what you are seeing, and what matters to you. I'd like you to think about someone that you could actually share this podcast with. We would like to flood the earth with the truths of the gospel of Jesus Christ. As women, we have been asked to speak up and speak out. We want to share the light of Jesus Christ throughout the world, and we would love your help in doing so. This may get us into our second topic a little bit as we're talking about your experience as a Jew, an individual experience, and I think that's so important, and I bring it up in this case. When we as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it's the formal title of our church, when we talk about scripture, it's the administrative structure of our church. It's very hierarchical. I mean, we talked about this when you were with me here 10 years ago, right? We have a prophet, a first presidency, a quorum of the 12, and the church itself is very hierarchical. The family is typically a husband and a wife or a single person, depending on how that is. But the structure is important. And so we see that a prophet, in a sense, is the one who is going to be declaring the truth, right? I mean, it's coming from his mouth, and it's very top down, I would say, in that way. There's a prophet who speaks with God. We can receive our own personal revelation, but there is one, right? That is so different than my experience with so many of my Jewish friends. And I think if you maybe even could teach us a little bit about the different sects, S-E-C-T-S, of Jews, and just the different experiences of Judaism, I think that would be really helpful for our audience, especially as we're looking at Exodus 12 and talking about the Passover. Because also many members of our faith, many Christian faiths will kind of do their own Passover service or something of that nature. And I'm sure it's very different than how we see you doing it. And you probably see it differently depending on where you are in the world and who you're doing it with. So can you kind of guide us through that a little bit too?
Christian Seder has always rubbed me a little bit the wrong way. That the Last Supper is not the same thing as a Passover Seder. A lot has happened in the past 2,000 years. The Jewish people have been in many places, and in those places have developed their own rituals. And that those have been passed down and commented on, and that's where the Talmud, the commentary of the rabbis, has come in as well. It's a big question, Barb. So I'm going to try my best to get it. After the destruction of the temple and the Babylonian exile, and there are many, there were still Jews in Israel, and many moved to Babylon, and then there was exiles from there, and Jewish communities have ended up all over the world. And there are different cultural forms of Judaism that have ended up all over the world as well. So Ashkenazi Jews typically are from Eastern Europe, Northern Europe, some Western Europe, but really congregated in Eastern Europe. Sephardic Jews come from Spain, and then after the Inquisition were sort of thrown out of Spain and ended up around the Mediterranean. Persian Jews have been in Iran for many, many years. There are Iraqi Jews. There are Jews in India. There are Jews in the Cochin Jews have been there for a long time. There are Jews in China. There are Jews in Ethiopia, and all of these have all happened for hundreds and hundreds of years and have all developed their own rituals. And so, for instance, when I was talking about the song Dayenu in a Passover Seder. So Iranian Jews will take scallions and during that song sort of beat each other with scallions. And that's just a tradition that comes from this Iranian community. And the idea is that it's a reminder of Pharaoh's whips and a reminder that you never want to be enslaved again, that freedom is really sweet. So there are all these cultural forms of Jews. And then in Europe, and then in America, a lot of different denominations of Judaism have developed. And so there are Orthodox Jews, there are ultra-Orthodox Jews, there are modern Orthodox Jews who are all on the more conservative, more traditional end of the spectrum. There are conservative Jews, which is a movement that developed in the United States that see themselves as both following halakha, or the laws, as well as living in the world today. And so sort of navigate that in their own way. They're egalitarian and believe that women and men should pray together. More Orthodox communities will separate men and women in prayer spaces. There are Reform Jews who really want to bring Judaism into the world today and are much more liberal. There are Renewal Jews who embraced Judaism in a more spiritual capacity. There are Reconstructionist Jews who see Judaism as a culture, that religion and God is still a part of it, but again, it manifested in different ways. We're all interpreting the things that have been handed down to us in different ways. So yes, we all celebrate Passover, right? Like we'll all have a Passover Seder and it looks different depending on where you are. And these customs and traditions look different. Even what we're allowed to eat and what we're not allowed to eat looks different. So on Passover, and it comes from the book of Exodus, you don't eat leavened bread. And so that's where matzah comes in. You can't let water and flour touch for more than 18 minutes before it goes into an oven. And so the and you can't use yeast at all. Obviously, you can't leaven things. So the flat crackers of matzah are the traditional food for Passover. Ashkenazi Jews will not eat rice, will not eat corn, because when those are ground up, they look like flour. And so they draw this fence around the law in order to make sure that they really are not going to eat anything leavened. Sephardic Jews, Mizrahi Jews, Jews of other areas are fine with rice. As a vegetarian, and my family is part Sephardic, it makes life much easier to eat rice and beans and chickpeas. But it really, like, all of these communities are wrestling with these ideas in their own ways.
Okay, so I want to take us into chapter 12, where we're talking about really the Passover. And I want to read some of this with you, if that's okay.
Sure.
How would you teach your children what the Passover is? I mean, as far as like the blood on the doorpost and things like that, like what is the Passover?
So Rabbi Gamliel taught in the Talmud that at every Passover Seder, you need to explain three things. You need to explain the Pesach, which is the Passover, this offering. You need to explain the matzah, and you need to explain the maror. And maror is this chopped up, again, depending on where you are in the world, either apples or dates and orange that looks like the mortar that you would use between bricks. And so, but the Pesach, this sacrifice, is one of these things that every Seder must explain. We have a Seder plate that has symbols on it, that we have I often use a beet because I'm vegetarian, but more traditional families will use a roasted shank bone. A beet kind of looks like it's bleeding when you roast it anyway. So that, makes us think of these things. And you'd have matzah and you'd have maror and you'd have parsley. I won't go into all of it, but it's there. It's on the table. And so you have to tell the story of when the Israelites lived in Egypt and before the sacrifice of the firstborn, the killing of the firstborn plague, God instructed the Israelites to do this sacrifice and take the blood of the lamb and smear it over the doorposts of the house. And because it was smeared over the doorposts of the house, the angel of death left those houses alone and did not touch them. And thus the Israelites' firstborn were saved.
Because by putting that, now you tell me if this is how you see it, how you would explain it. Because those who are doing that are showing that they are believing in God and they are obedient to what God is asking to do. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And that is what will lead you to freedom, right? That this belief in what God is asking you to do. Just to connect it a little bit to Jewish communities right now, like Jewish homes will often, not always, but often have a mezuzah on the doorpost. And in that mezuzah, which many of your listeners hopefully will have seen on a Jewish home, there's a scroll that has a very important prayer on it, called the Shema. But the idea that it's on the doorpost of the home is harken back to this story of the Pesach and how you're painting the blood on a Jewish home.
So if I go into this, understanding then what we're saying here about the purpose of the Passover and why we're celebrating this, I wanted just to go into chapter 12.
Yeah.
And then maybe just ask you questions and you kind of express to us some of the things that maybe we could be aware of. So I'll go ahead and read this here from the King James Version is what I'm using today. I don't have to, but that's what I have in front of me. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you the beginning of the months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Okay, so I'm going there. You talked about the calendar.
Yeah.
And what does this have to do with the Jewish calendar? And you're talking about holidays and things of that nature.
So there are 4 Jewish New Years. It's very confusing. And this is one of the Jewish New Years, right? That this idea that the telling of the story of the Exodus, the marking of this is one of the ways that we start counting time again. Rosh Hashanah is one of the Jewish New Years, but this also marks the beginning of a year and how we count time. There's another way of counting time that I don't think comes into this chapter. I think it's a bit later, but the Passover Seder and the beginning of Passover marks the beginning of the counting of the Omer. And the counting of the Omer is when you count every single day from the second night of Passover until Shavuot. And this was a harvest practice in which they would count grains of wheat. But there's, again, this idea of like measuring time, that there are seasons for things, and how we measure time is really important, both in God's view, but also how we keep communities together.
I'm going to go to verse 5. I'm going to skip a little bit. Verse 5, your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. Now, you know enough about Christianity. When we look at a verse like this and we think of the lamb and we think of a male without blemish, I think many of us are automatically turning to Jesus Christ. That's not what you're going to be turning to here, and that's not what you're going to be thinking about. Can you tell us what is the significance of this lamb and the male of the first year without blemish? Is there any significance to that for you?
I think it's an idea of purity. A male lamb without blemish is something that has been cared for. This is me. I'm just making this up in the ways that I'm thinking about this. But, it is something, when you give offerings to God, they should be without blemish. They should be pure. And there are a lot of rules around all this. I'm studying this with my rabbi now in my Talmud study, but around offerings. And so this is just another way of how we think about how we offer both animals, but also produce to God, around what the laws around the temple are as well. So this, to me, is sort of the beginning of some of these offerings.
And you were just talking about the 2 side posts, so I'm going to skip that and go to verse 8. They shall eat the flesh in the night, roast with fire, and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat. Now, you already mentioned the unleavened bread part, and you kind of did it fast. Again, what is the significance of the unleavened bread? Why unleavened bread?
This is a big point for kids. It's a great thing to act out with kids. So the idea is that when Pharaoh let the Israelites go and leave Egypt, it happened so fast that the bread didn't even have time to rise. So they cooked it on their backs and they ran, because they weren't going to wait for Pharaoh to change his mind. And so how do we remember that and ritualize that in our communities today? It's by this matzah, this unleavened bread. The first day tastes fine, day 8 less so. But helps us remember again what it meant to be slaves and what it meant to leave fast, because we really wanted to go. And freedom was calling, and that's part of the unleavenedness.
Which is significant because Moses has talked to the Pharaoh how many times asking to let us go. And the Pharaoh refuses, and the people aren't just waiting. And then when he says it's time to go, then they're having to pack up their stuff and get ready to go. They're ready to go in the moment that the Lord calls them to go. They go, right? I mean, And I think that's part of it. And you see that verse 11, and thus shall ye eat with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and ye shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover.
Yeah. Barb, can I go back a second, though,
Please.
to verse 8? Because I haven't talked about the bitter herbs.
Oh, yes, please. Oh, yes, please. Yep.
The bitter herbs are another important part of a Passover Seder and what's on the Seder plate. And the bitter herbs are to remind us of the tears of the Israelites when they were forced into this hard labor, that when we remember what it means to be enslaved, that's also in our mouths, how we eat these foods that remind our bodies about enslavement. And that's the bitter herbs are, we eat in a Hillel sandwich, which is supposedly the first sandwich ever invented in the world. I think 1500, but don't quote me on that. He put the matzah with the sweet and the bitter need to be together, because that's what life is as well, right? Like, it's not all sweet and it's not all bitter. Oftentimes these things come together.
Thank you so much. And I think you brought up a point that for me is extremely important. And I know we're talking years ago with these individuals, and we're talking Moses, but I want to bring it to now And then we can go back years ago again. When you talk about that mourning and the bitterness of life, I just can't help but think of the difficulty over centuries that many Jewish individuals have had to suffer. This is one example of many, right? But this is in the scripture. And I just I remember being at a meeting with Elder Cook. He's a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles for our faith. And I was actually in the BYU Jerusalem Center. And he was speaking there about Latter-day Saints and how sometimes we have been victims to some cruelty in the world. We have our own history of being kicked out of Ohio in the United States, and then of Missouri, and then we go up to Nauvoo and all of those places, and now many end up in Salt Lake, and we just kind of have this sometimes kind of a victim experience and even a mentality. But I remember him commenting in that talk that he said, as Latter-day Saints, although we've been through these things, we can never compare to the suffering of so many of our Jewish friends. Can you speak to that just briefly?
Yeah, I mean, we are a diasporic people, and it means that we have been thrown out and killed and persecuted in many places around the world. I'm the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor. Um, my grandfather, my Zaidi, hid in the woods during the war and escaped with his life. My other side of my family was thrown out of Spain during the Inquisition and went to Italy and then to Greece. Our story is one of persecution, of anti-Semitism, of Jew hatred, but it's also more than that. And I think the resilience and the keep on keeping onness, right?
Yeah.
That there has been really hard moments, and I am here because my ancestors kept going and did not stop. And I think for me, that's been incredibly motivating. It's both to keep an eye out for anti-Semitism and where it happens in our modern worlds, but also not to be stuck in that and to continue to love my children and future generations and teach them and this idea that I will not be defined by being persecuted. I think there's more to Judaism than that, and Jewish communities. And I'm also can't deny it, right? That it is part of the story of what it means to be part of the Jewish people.
I recognize and I appreciate that you are a fighter and that you're going to take and make the best of everything. But I also see here in the book of Exodus how these people are also fighters, and they were being kept in captivated for so long. And now finally they have this opportunity to run to God, in a sense, to have their freedom, to believe what they want to believe and teach what they want to teach. And they have this sense of great responsibility for their families, which is something else I think that we have in common a lot is family. I think both of us care so much about our family. Both of us care about, in this case, our husbands and our children. I wanted to go to that with you. I mean, we're still going to kind of go through some of this as we're talking about these families, that they're walking together in this group, or these people are walking together, and they're going to be coming to the point where they're about to the Red Sea. And it says in verse 21, "Then Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said unto them, Draw out and take you a lamb according to your families and kill the Passover." So he's giving them assignments according to their family. And I just wanted to ask you, what role does the family play in the Passover? Whether it's women and men, and I know that's going to be different depending on what form of Judaism you are living, right? But what is the role of the family in the Passover? You talked about children too, but husband, wife, women.
I mean, Passover, unlike any other Jewish holiday, as I'm thinking out loud through them all, is a home ritual, right? You don't go to synagogue to celebrate Passover. You do it at home. You can go to synagogue and there are books to read and prayer services, but you do it at home with your family and your community. And it's something that brings people together back home, and family, grown-up children will travel home for Passover. My father's family had gotten so big that they rented out a fire hall, a first aid station. And so we would get, I don't know, 80 to 100 people would come from all over New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania to come back for a Passover Seder. And that idea of sort of coming back together from wherever you are to celebrate Passover and to tell this story again and to tell the story of your family through family traditions and, how does your matzo ball soup taste and what do you eat for, this course, or what kind of dessert? How do you make dessert without leaven? These are big questions, right? But these stories of even food and how we pass food down in generations, from generation to generation. In a more traditional Seder, it would be the father sits at the head of the table, and my grandfather used to do this. I would have to say every single word of the Passover Seder, what's in the Haggadah, and that's changed over the years. I lead my Passover Seders in my family, and in 2020, we did it on Zoom with family members from all over the country that we wouldn't normally have had a Passover Seder if we weren't in a pandemic. But there is always this return to what it means to be family together. There are ritual hand washings that are part of a Passover Seder that often two people get up with a bucket, a bowl, and a cup of water to wash everybody's hands around the table. Right? There's this idea that we are all in this together as a family, whether we're related or not. If you're around my Passover Seder table, you are part of the telling of the story and the family for that night, at least.
So you brought up another point. I remember talking to you before we got on this podcast together, and we were talking about some of these traditions that change depending on where you are in the Jewish faith and your experiences. But I remember you talking about you marrying a Mennonite. Is that right? And then your
Yeah,
children.
yeah,
So
my husband
I'm
grew up
wondering,
Mennonite.
there's so many times again in the Old Testament that we're seeing, or the Hebrew Bible, that talks about the covenant and marrying in the covenant, or so it seems. We see Isaac and Abraham and Sarah being so concerned about, or Abraham, I guess in this case, being so concerned about who Isaac's going to marry. And we see that again with Rebecca and Jacob as he's getting older. And walk us through that a little bit. What is this marriage relationship, and how do you continue on with your faith tradition and the way you live it in a relationship where you've married somebody outside of the Jewish faith? Walk us through that a little bit. What is that like for you?
I mean, we have those traditions within the Torah, which are so important. And we also have the fact that Moses married Zipporah and that his father-in-law was Jethro, this Midianite priest. And Moses had such respect. I know you'll get to this in a few weeks, but had such respect for Jethro and how he helped Moses understand what it means to be a leader of his people, right? So we have these interreligious relationships that the Torah also teaches us. Every couple has to figure this out and has to figure out how they have these conversations, one with each other, and if they're going to have kids, what it means to have these relationships with their kids. My husband has a really interesting background. He was born in Ethiopia and grew up in Tanzania. We actually met in India. He was there for 3 years doing service work when I was there during graduate school for a few months. We fell in love talking about theology over making dumplings. And so these ideas of how do we talk about God? How do we talk about community and who we are and what's important to us have been baked into our relationship from the very beginning. Does that mean that it was easy? No, definitely not. But I think that with every marriage, you're coming from two different places. And so you have to have those conversations anyway. Ours were more stark, probably because of our backgrounds. But we realized we also share so much in common in our own theologies. And the Mennonite church is a peace-based church, and pacifism is an important part of his lived theology. And for me, that's also an incredibly important part as a peacemaker, as somebody who wants to do this interreligious engagement and peace-building work. And so through our conversations, for me, through my inheritance, through my own identity, raising our children Jewish has been really important to me. And he has understood that and supported that and comes with us to synagogue. He calls himself Jewish. He's not converted, but he's part of the community, certainly. And our community is made up of interfaith couples and, Jewish and Jewish couples or converts or people from all over the place who are yearning to be in community together and appreciate what the Jewish tradition and community and rabbinic tradition teaches. And so show up in that way. But I do, in our world, I don't know now more than ever, but maybe now more than ever, all of our different traditions are encountering each other in different ways. And how those relationships that will happen at some of these synergies talk about what's important to them and why, I think is exciting. For some people it's scary. For me, I think it's exciting as long as we're actually being honest in those conversations.
You brought me into a couple of thoughts and a couple of questions. One is we haven't even talked about what you do as a chaplain. I mean, me having served as a chaplain as well, but you are serving as the head chaplain at Yale. And can you just, I mean, you're just talking about this peacemaking and this unifying and this interfaith relationship that you're having within your own faith community, but you're way expanding beyond that. I mean, as a chaplain, you are taking on an interfaith world in higher education that most people have never experienced. So what does it mean to be in your position?
It means something different every day, which is a beautiful thing. But it means that I am here and my staff is here to care for and move alongside, walk with folks from all different spiritual traditions and none. Sometimes that's about providing religious services or religious teachings or trying to help people explain to their professors why they can't do this assignment on a religious holiday or that they need this particular food to meet their dietary obligations. And so it's supporting the individuals in their religious traditions and their spiritual callings. It's also about showing up and offering pastoral care and presence in times of often grief of all different sorts and varieties, but sometimes joy and growth and reminding people that we are humans, that we are not just our intellects. I like to say we're not brains on sticks, though sometimes our institutions try to treat us as that. We are full beings with all that that means in our spiritual selves. And then the third aspect is about helping people be in conversation with each other, is about helping them ask humble questions, lead with curiosity, learning how to explain who they are to somebody who knows nothing about that. And it's only through this like really heartfelt engagement with one another that I believe that we can build a peaceful world. That we have like what an incredible opportunity that we have to learn about one another. And in higher education, it's an opportunity unlike any other, right? You're bringing folks together from all different walks of life and viewpoints and perspectives and religions and backgrounds, and we're in a room together. Like, how amazing that we can talk together and break bread together, and share with one another. And so, my days look like much more than those things, but those are sort of the three buckets that I like to say the chaplaincy covers.
One of the things that I learned as a chaplain on the East Coast was the great respect for other religious leaders, and other religious people, just in general, just so much love and respect for so many. And there was, as I mentioned previously, there was a man, Christopher Stendhal, who was really helping, in a sense, even the LDS churches. We were trying to build a temple in Sweden, and kind of taught some of the important principles about interfaith work. And one of those that we mentioned was this idea of holy envy. And typically when we ask a question about holy envy, it's us saying, what kind of holy envy do we have of another faith? And I could throw out many holy envies that I have of Judaism and many that I have met. One of them is actually mentioned here in terms of the Passover is Shabbat. With some of my Jewish friends that I've been with, we were putting down our cell phones, and we were paying attention to each other instead of to the electronics, and we were thinking about what we were grateful for. I just can you talk to us a little bit about Shabbat and what that is? And then I also, well, we'll go there first. I'm going to tell you, I want to ask you the other question is what holy envy do you kind of see that you wish we could have of you? What are we not understanding that we could understand? But let's talk Shabbat first if we can, because that's one of my holy envies.
Jews do not keep Shabbat, but Shabbat keeps the Jews, right? This idea of mandatory rest, that we need to put down the phones. We need to stop from everyday sort of consumerist lives, from our busy schedules in which we're triple booked for things in order to be in community. It's hard to keep Shabbat if others around you are not keeping Shabbat. right? That there's this mandatory togetherness that happens with Shabbat. But in a time in which we're more tied to electronics than I think ever before, what a gift to rewire our nervous systems by not looking at screens and by not being distracted by whatever news headline is coming out at any particular time, but to truly be present with the people in front of you. Shabbat is a gift of time. It is a gift of the world to come. Like Shabbat is such an incredible gift that God has given through this idea that creation happens for 6 days and we rest on the seventh. And that rest is as important as creation. That rest allows us to continue. And rest is mandatory. It's not something you can check off or something that you can opt into or opt out of, but we need to rest in order to be. So one of the things, just to share a little bit more about chaplaincy, I have a group of undergraduate students that come together every Monday night called IFE. It's the Interfaith Forum at Yale. They name themselves. I love that it's called IFE.
That's great.
And I do a program with them called Speed Faithing. And so they pair off and I ask a question and each of them has 60 seconds to answer. And then they go meet somebody else. It's kind of like speed dating, but in its own way. And I always start with very sort of surface level questions like, tell me a story of your name. What is something that you love about your religious tradition? And I end up asking, what is something you wish you could tell your parents about the way that you were raised religiously? And these are 18 to 22-year-olds, so it's still pretty new in being raised. But like, you can only ask that once you've really been able to go through those surface level questions and get to know each other.
I had a profound discussion again with another friend of the Jewish faith tradition that we had just left the synagogue, and for whatever reason, we got on the topic of abortion. And I remember just asking her, from my perspective, I know that this is important to you. And in her eyes, she felt that abortion was really the choice of the mother. And of course, I was saying, but what about the baby? And we were kind of going back and forth. And she just thanked me so much for being willing to ask and listen to what she was saying. But the way she expressed it, of her tie into, in her case, she tied it into the Holocaust, and she tied it into being able to choose and the freedom to be able to have those kinds of experiences. And just listening to her express why she felt so strongly. And it was a very meaningful conversation that would never have happened had we not had other questions that were maybe shallower at the beginning and that got deeper and deeper. But boy, did it strengthen our relationship as friends. And I don't know that I know that we didn't necessarily agree at the end, and that wasn't the point. The point was that we had a discussion and we got to know each other better. And we better understood our backgrounds and had a very real level of respect and friendship.
You built trust with one another because you trusted each other in your own vulnerability. Right? It could have easily turned into a yelling match or a blasting something on social media, but it didn't, because you built trust with one another.
That's right. It wasn't a matter of who was right or even what was right. It was our relationship was the most important, and learning from each other. Yeah, it was so important. So Maytal, I asked you that question. What about the holy envy? What do you wish that people could see in you? Did we say a practicing Jew in this case, or what do we say, Maytal?
Yeah.
Is that okay to say it that way? Okay.
And practicing means so many different things.
It does. So yeah.
I mean, I think something about Judaism that I love, that I wish more people knew about, is this idea of wrestling with God, right? That it's really part of who we are as a people to wrestle with what God is telling us, to pull apart arguments, to spend hours on one page of what the rabbis have said. And this idea that it's not necessarily about being right. There's a Talmudic story that there was a fight between Hillel and Shammai, the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai. Two very famous rabbis sort of went back and forth about many things. And at the end, God said, like, this is right and this is right. Right? Like, both houses are right, even when they're contradicting each other. What it means that, like, both are the word of God. And that doesn't need to make sense to us, right? It needs to work for God, but that we can argue about things and also both be right, that we can explore things, that we can really pull apart arguments and what we're saying, I think is so Jewish, and I love it. And sometimes it frustrates me, but that doesn't mean I don't love it too. This idea of arguing for the sake of heaven, and that if we didn't argue for the sake of heaven, something would be lost in that. So I think that's something that I think about with Holy Envy. I think another thing that I would just add is around the ritual cycle and the life cycle events in Jewish life. We had talked before we got on this phone call about grief, about what happens after death, and the cycle of things that are prescribed, that you have to bury a body within 24 hours, that you have to then sit Shiva for 7 days, and people come to your house and you sit on the ground, and there's this really ritualized grief. And then for a year, every day, you say this special Kaddish, this mourner's blessing that you can't do by yourself. You need 10 people. Like, that community is such a part of this, that there are rituals around birth, there are rituals around death, and that those rituals help hold the Jews together. That Shabbat is one of those, certainly, and the one that happens the most often, but that there are more that continue to tie the threads of community together.
It is so important, that tying of community. I think about, again, just my multiple friends that are of a variety of faiths. And one of the questions I often received as a chaplain, and I still receive, is how do you stay active in your own faith when you meet all these other people of faiths? And I think that's one of the important points is we have our community within our own faith, and there's nothing wrong with that either. And because of that, hopefully, we're able to be stronger and trust each other outside of our faiths because we're grounded in our homes. We're grounded in our own faith, which gives us the confidence and ability to be able to talk to other people of other faiths. As a chaplain, we're not trying to convert each other. We're learning from each other. We're growing with each other. We're communing with each other. We are, in a sense, we're talking later about the scattering of Israel. We're gathering Israel, in a sense, as we're with each other. That's how it feels to me. I just appreciate you taking the time and all of the studies you've done to be able to come, in a sense, to my home and me to your home, and to be able to talk about those things that are important. This idea of the Passover, and we talked about education, we talked about family, we talked about God, we talked about the book, we've talked about relationships and people that we love and our own faith beliefs. And I just can't thank you enough for taking your time to be here with us. As most of us, I would say, are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and we have this wonderful opportunity to learn from you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Barb, for the invitation.
Maytal, as we end this book of Exodus, we're really into chapter 13. We find that Moses is going to take these bones of Joseph, right? He's going to bring them along, and these wonderful people are going to have this experience of crossing the Red Sea. And I love, right, as we're ending up in chapter 13, and the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, to go by day and night. He took not away the pillar of the cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. So as they are walking, and they're going to be walking through this Red Sea on dry ground, the Lord is with them. So I just pray that you know that I recognize that the Lord is with you, and I appreciate you walking with him and being such an example and walking with me on this path. So thank you, friend. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And just thank you, all of our wonderful listeners and those who are participating today. As members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we often talk about this covenant path that we are walking on. And I hope that we realize that there are many people of various faiths who are also walking this covenant path with us. I'm so grateful for Maytal for walking that covenant path with me as we serve together as chaplains. And I'm grateful that she continues to walk this covenant path with many young adults, people of her own faith, and people of a variety of faiths and no faiths throughout the world. We encourage you also to continue the study of your scriptures, especially today in the book of Exodus, as we're talking about the Passover and we're talking about these plagues, that we realize how important it is that we have each other, that we are ready to run and we are ready to move as the Lord would have us move, so that we can be prepared to cross our own Red Seas on dry ground. We need each other. Thank you again for joining us on Grounded.